Hi, I'm Dave Groom. I'm a landscape artist who lives in South Eastern Queensland on the edge of Lamington National Park. This is an area that our family has lived in for over 4 generations. I think it's important to have a sense of connection to place, no matter who you are. And as an artist, it's very important in that you need to get to know the area well. And this is an area that I've gotten to know well. I see nature as being something that's close to the truth. It's an evolved life form that's evolved over millions of years. And this sense of truth is something that I try to capture in my work. As an artist, and particularly a landscape artist, for me it's about the colours and the textures and the atmosphere of the environment that's around me here. It's quite a unique environment in that where we are right here is open eucalypt forest, and only 2 or 3 kilometres up the road it's rainforest, so it's a varied environment. This all comes about from the different volcanic flows that happened millions of years ago from the ancient Mount Warning Caldera, and it certainly adds to a real sense of dynamic space in the area, and I love playing around with these different environments. I've been asked before what led me to becoming a landscape artist, and for me it was quite a defining moment. I'd spent about a year travelling overseas, and I came back to Australia having seen all these different landscapes overseas and looked at the Australian landscape, and particularly the Australian light, in a whole new way. And this was the inspiration for me to produce my first body of drawings, and that led me to becoming a full-time artist. Generally when I'm working, I work from memory. I think one of the values of living here for so long is that I've got a real sense for the environment and the landscape around me. While I find these days I spend just as much time looking at the landscape as I do painting it. But when it actually comes to putting brush to canvas or pencil to paper, I tend to spend my time in the studio doing this rather than painting outside. For me, this gives me greater freedom in expression in that I can create a landscape from memory. So sometimes these landscapes are more like dreamscapes. They have a slight surreal element to them because they're something that I've created from memory rather than looking at a particular landscape. Usually what I'll do is start with a series of drawings. You could call them study drawings, but they're also works of art in themselves. And if they're in black and white, I usually use charcoal. The beauty of this is that I'm just dealing with line and tone, so sometimes I don't even have to really define particular shapes and parts of the landscape. It's more thinking about the atmosphere and the textures of the landscape. When I go from the study drawings to the painting stage, then there's a certain amount of definition that I have to do with the work, but I tend to stick fairly close to what's in the drawing when I create the painting, because if there's an atmosphere in the drawing, then I try to transfer this atmosphere to the painting, and it's a matter of bringing in colour, and I usually create the paintings on a larger scale than I do with the drawing. I think it's really important as an artist to stay totally inspired. It can be easy to get into a little bit of a rut and be producing the same sort of work all the time, but I like to not only change the way I work, but also even the styles that I work in, so that I'm constantly inspired. This means maybe spending 2 or 3 months on one large piece and then moving to a bunch of smaller paintings which may only take 1 or 2 days at a time. But the goal for me is to stay inspired all the time and this tends to produce fresher and more dynamic art. I like the idea of returning to either a theme or a style when I'm working, and so I find every 3 or 4 years I may go back to, sometimes it will just be a viewpoint that I'd like to work in, or an atmosphere that I'd like to create. And the beauty of this and the value of this as an artist is that by coming back to it every few years, you're coming back to it with the current skills you have as an artist. And as an artist, you need to keep always refining these skills, whether they're painting skills or just skills of observation. It's something that is important to me, in that you want to be constantly learning. So by returning to a particular theme, then it gives you the chance to work in a fresher way, and it also lets you compare the work you did a few years ago to the work you're currently doing. One of the beauties of living in a landscape for so long is you really do get to know it, and apart from the incredible natural landscape we have around us here, we're also on the edge of what's known as the Beechmont Plateau. And this area was a dairy farming community for a long time. It was originally logged and then became a dairy farming area. And it's got a really interesting feel, and it has that pastoral sense, but there's also remnant rainforest trees that managed to survive the original clearing and are still scattered around in amongst the paddocks. So every now and then I like to do a series of paintings that are inspired by the local Beechmont landscape. These are quite different from the natural landscape in that you have a lot more space, because a lot of it is just cleared pastoral land. But I do like playing around with that idea too, of looking at these remaining remnant trees that have survived over 100 years and are still there, and it makes you just think a little bit about the landscape and how we've changed it over the years, and what it will be like in the future. Over the years I've also done a series of what I call pod paintings. These paintings are interesting in that I've taken organic shapes and forms and created pod-like structures that float around in the atmosphere. In the last few years I've also added what I call wreath paintings, and these paintings have a similar organic form that floats in the atmosphere that's shaped like a floral wreath. We tend to view floral wreaths as something that we use for remembrance or even a sense of mourning, and this is connected to the reasons I paint these wreath paintings, in that it makes us reflect on the landscape we have. Unfortunately, over the years we've lost an awful lot of the natural landscape to development, so I suppose with these paintings I'm allowing us to look at the landscape and reflect on this sense of what we still have and also what we've lost.